Here's a name that will start an argument amongst fans of history: Caliph Abdulhamid II. To some, the proud, politically conscious Muslim types, he was the last great Caliph, the defender of Islam, the man who held the Khilafah together with sheer willpower while Europe circled like wolves. To others, Armenians, Assyrians, most Western historians, he was the Red Sultan, the Bloody Sultan, a paranoid autocrat who massacred hundreds of thousands of his own subjects. So which is it? Was Abdulhamid a visionary defender of Islamic civilization, or was he a brutal tyrant who gave the Ottoman Empire's death rattle a particularly bloody soundtrack? Today we're going to sit with that discomfort because the honest answer is, he was both. Before we get into the video, if you end up enjoying this video, please hype it. It's a new feature YouTube has introduced that helps content creators from an algorithm point of view. And obviously make sure to like, comment and subscribe. As usual, let's start with the context. Abdulhamid II came to power in 1876, inheriting an empire that was, to put it bluntly, on life support. The Ottomans had lost war after war. The empire was hemorrhaging territory in the Balkans, and the treasury wasn't just struggling, it was officially, formally bankrupt, having defaulted on its European debts in 1875. The scale of that financial crisis is hard to overstate. By the time Abdulhamid took the throne, roughly 40% of all Ottoman government expenditure was being swallowed by debt repayments to these European lenders. The empire wasn't just militarily vulnerable, it was being financially bled dry. And hovering over all of it were the great European powers: Britain, France, Russia, Austria, each with economic interests embedded deep inside Ottoman territory, each cultivating relationships with minority communities, each waiting for the right moment. The Balkans had already shown what that waiting looked like in practice. Greek independence in 1830, Serbian autonomy, the Bulgarian massacres of 1876 that triggered a Russian invasion and nearly ended the Ottoman Empire on the spot. European powers were not passive observers of Ottoman decline. They were actively accelerating it, funding nationalist movements, arming separatists, using the language of protecting Christian minorities as diplomatic cover for straightforward imperial expansion. This is the world Abdulhamid stepped into, and it shaped everything that followed. So let's first make the case for him. One of the most overlooked achievements of Abdulhamid's reign, and one that his critics never really mention, is what he did with the empire's finances. In 1881, under significant European pressure, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, the OPDA, was established. A body that handed control of significant Ottoman revenue streams directly to European creditors. Needless to say, it was humiliating. There is no other word for it. Foreign administrators sitting in Istanbul collecting Ottoman tax revenues to service Ottoman debts to European banks. But Abdulhamid decided to work with it rather than against it. The OPDA, for all of its indignity, actually gave the empire something it had lacked for decades: a degree of fiscal credibility in the eyes of European creditors. By allowing foreign administrators to manage debt repayments reliably, Abdulhamid stabilized Ottoman creditworthiness enough to negotiate significantly better terms on future borrowing. Rather than contracting new debt at the punishing interest rates that had crippled his predecessors, he was able to refinance existing obligations at lower rates, reducing the annual debt servicing burden substantially over time. Simultaneously, he pursued a deliberate policy of revenue expansion to reduce dependence on European capital altogether. The OPDA's administration of assigned revenues, custom duties, certain provincial taxes, the salt and tobacco monopolies, was actually more efficient than the Ottoman bureaucracy it replaced. And the surplus revenues it generated above debt repayment obligations were returned to the Ottoman treasury. Abdulhamid used that returning revenue stream, combined with tighter central control over provincial tax collection to fund infrastructure without additional European borrowing. The Hijaz Railway is the clearest example of this philosophy in action. Rather than going to European banks, he funded it through a global Islamic donation campaign, framing it as a religious obligation to facilitate Hajj. Contributions came from Muslims in India, Central Asia, Egypt, and beyond. The railway was built without a single Ottoman bond issued to a European creditor. By the time he was deposed in 1909, the share of the imperial budget consumed by debt servicing had fallen from roughly 50% at its peak in the 1870s to somewhere closer to 20%. Still significant, but no longer the existential stranglehold it had been. It was unglamorous, grinding, institutional work. Not the stuff of legend, but it was statecraft of a real and serious kind, and it deserves to be part of his story. Beyond the finances, Abdulhamid's broader strategic vision was genuinely impressive. He positioned himself not just as Ottoman Sultan, but leaned into his status as Caliph of all Muslims, cultivating relationships with Muslim communities from India to Central Asia, creating a sense of pan-Islamic solidarity that genuinely worried British, French, and Russian imperial administrators, because all of them ruled over enormous Muslim populations. He understood that Islamic legitimacy was the one resource the European powers couldn't simply purchase or seize. The Hijaz Railway is a good example of the benefits of his pan-Islamic strategy. Then there's his anti-Zionism. When the founder of modern Zionism, Theodor Herzl, came up to him in 1901 seeking land in Palestine for a Jewish homeland, Abdulhamid refused. Clearly, directly, on record. I know to many people in the world, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is considered to be complicated and picking a side may feel like a coin flip. It's not. There is a right and a wrong side. Religion aside, I say that as a human being who knows the basic difference between good and bad. Due to fears of algorithmic consequences, I'll let you guess which one is which. In the contemporary Muslim world, where Palestine is the defining political cause, that refusal has made him into something close to a hero for a whole generation of Muslims. Add in the Turkish drama Payitaht, watched by millions of Muslims across the world, and you can understand why his reputation has undergone such dramatic rehabilitation. But here is where intellectual honesty requires us to slow down, because Abdulhamid's reign was marked by mass atrocities, and to understand them properly, you have to understand the particular nightmare he was navigating. By the 1890s, the pattern was clear and consistent. A minority community inside the Ottoman Empire would develop a nationalist political movement. That movement would attract the interest and support of a European power looking for leverage. That European power would begin making diplomatic noises about protecting said minority, and before long, Ottoman territory would be lost. It happened with the Greeks, it happened with the Bulgarians, it happened with the Serbs. Each time the script was essentially the same. When Armenian political organizations began emerging in eastern Anatolia in the 1880s and 1890s, with clear links to Russian interests across the border, Abdulhamid saw that same script beginning again. And he made a decision that from a cold imperial logic was comprehensible, but from a human standpoint was indefensible. Between 1894 and 1896, Ottoman forces and the Hamidiye cavalry, Kurdish tribal militias that Abdulhamid had armed and organized as a tool of internal control, carried out a systematic campaign of violence against Armenian and Assyrian communities across eastern Anatolia. The death toll rises up to 300,000 people. The Hamidiye units were not a spontaneous mob. They were Abdulhamid's instrument, deliberately set against the population he had identified as an existential threat to imperial integrity. His supporters argued that Armenian political movements had genuine Russian backing, that the threat of separatism was real, that an empire fighting for its life cannot be judged by peacetime standards. And I understand that argument, but there is a significant distance between suppressing an armed separatist movement and potentially killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. Cracking eggs is one thing, what happened to the Armenians, and to some extent the Assyrians as well, was something categorically different. The scale, the targeting of ordinary people, the use of famine and displacement alongside direct violence, these were not the byproducts of counterinsurgency, they were the policy. What the massacres reveal more than anything is the psychological state of a man who had watched his empire dismembered piece by piece for 2 decades, and had concluded that the only way to stop it was to make the cost of separatism so catastrophic that no community would dare attempt it. It was the logic of desperation. It was also the logic of a man who had stopped seeing a certain of his subjects as subjects, and started seeing them purely as threats. That transformation, from Sultan to something colder, is the real darkness at the heart of his reign. In 1909, the Young Turks finally moved against him. He had agreed to restore the constitution after their 1908 revolt, but when he was implicated in a counter-coup to restore absolute rule, they deposed him, stripped him of power, and sent him into exile in Thessaloniki, ironically the birthplace of Ataturk. He died in 1918 in a palace in Istanbul, having lived long enough to watch the empire he had spent his life defending begin its final collapse under the men who replaced him. Abdulhamid was a man of genuine strategic vision and genuine moral failure, operating under pressure that would have broken most rulers entirely. He stabilized the finances, resisted European encroachment with remarkable ingenuity, championed Islamic solidarity before it was fashionable, and said no to Zionism when it would have been easy to say yes for a price. He also presided over the massacre of hundreds of thousands of his own subjects, driven by a paranoia that was partially justified and partially monstrous. His fans need to look at the Hamidian massacres without flinching. His critics need to look at the empire he inherited without sanitizing it. And all of us need to resist the temptation to flatten a deeply complicated man into either a villain or a saint. Drop your verdict in the comments, the Red Sultan or the last Caliph. I want to know where you guys land. As usual, I want to thank my patrons for continuing to support Hikmah History. If you want to support the channel, the Patreon link is on the screen and in the description below. Don't forget to like, share and hype the video if you enjoyed it. Until next time, peace!